Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. This is the 9th training for startups in the Startup in Residence program, pitching to government buyers and stakeholders. Thank you for being here. So I want to talk a little bit about the Startup in Residence program that's happening here through the San Francisco Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation and the Department of Technology. You can see here that there's a mission around bringing government and startups together to help solve technology challenges that are happening in the public sector. Some of the goals include helping to build some bridges, empower city departments, and also give the startups some tools and insight into working with government customers. This year, the Startup in Residence program is working with 4 cities, so that's San Francisco, San Leandro, Oakland, and West Sacramento. There's 14 startups working with 13 government departments on specific challenges, and this is part of our education and training component that we have created as a supplement to the 16-week program. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panel. So we have JC Velton, who is the partner at Zelmark, a branding company that he started in 2013. And we have Monique Woodard, who is a venture partner of 500 Startups, and she's also the co-founder of Black Founders, which works to encourage more Black community members to be involved in tech entrepreneurship. And she was also one of the first Civic Innovation Fellows at the Mayor's Office, San Francisco. Yay. Next, we have Chris Maddox, the CEO of Seneca Systems, a mission-driven company that works to empower public servants. And finally, we have Maria Amundsen, who is the former global chair of the technology sector of Edelman, which is the world's largest communications company, and she led a team of 550 across 35 countries in technology communications. Yes. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to our moderator, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you. Thank you for attending. The goal is to help you guys with this session. So I'm just going to open, probably ask one question to each of these guys, and then please ask as many questions as you want. This is a session for you guys, and we are here to help you navigate the seemingly complex world of working with the government. So with that, I'm going to start with a question for Chris. So if I go to your site, the first thing I see in your site is building better government. So in the context of being a startup working with the government, what does that mean?
Yeah, okay. So my co-founder and I were philosophy majors, so we're really into the mission-driven aspect of companies and actually building something that helps people as well as just, making money or whatever. So for us, that means we've worked in private industry for a long time. There are things that private industry does extraordinarily well. There are things that it's not very good at, but there are things that I think we could take some of the learnings and the tools that are available in private companies to bring to the public sector. I mean, like, if you look at the team that sells ads on Snapchat, they have better tools than your average public servant by decades, by like a long shot. And that's ridiculous, right? Like, Snapchat makes a lot of money, maybe, but and also is like very popular, but is it something that our world really needs? I don't know. Like, I'm okay telling my kids at the end of the day that, like, I'm working to build a better government rather than, like, I help people share pictures or whatever.
So you were one of the first innovators in this type of programs.
Sure.
What
okay.
would then, just to take the same thread, building a better government mean for a startup?
So I think for a startup, building better government means having, to echo what Chris just said, having access to a lot of the same tools that, your average startup does. I think that there are ways that government can be more efficient and can serve more people. But it's really difficult for government to have access to those tools and the same level of technological know-how and mind power that the private sector does. And so when you're thinking about building better government, I think it's about making the government playing field level and making government have access to the same things that any large tech company like Google or Facebook would have access to. And I also just think it's about making government easier and more accessible for the end user, who is, your average, Joe or Jane on the street who, just needs to interact with government and wants it to be extremely efficient, personalized, and very easy. And that's really what it's about. It's about being able to service that end user in a way that makes them feel like, government is actually working for me.
And what was your biggest insight after going through the program?
That there are lots of really smart, talented, incredibly intelligent people inside government working every day to make this city and the world a better place, and that sometimes they just don't have the tools or the ability to do so. I think that, from the outside looking in, we say government is extremely bureaucratic. We get extremely frustrated at the way that government works. And from the inside looking out, it's not that, you want to be a bureaucrat inside government. It's just that sometimes you don't have access to the tools that make your job easier and that make you better able to interact with the outside world.
Not to pick on you, but why would you, and actually it's kind of the same thing you said, why would people in government don't have access to the same tools that people in companies have? Mm-hmm. If they have the internet and have phones to call these startups, what's the difference?
Well, it's not just about internet and phones to call these startups. I mean, let's take a look at the RFP and RFQ process. I mean, in order to get a tool that a private company would use, it's an extremely onerous process. And, there are certainly people out there trying to reform the RFP process, but it's a very long and hard road. So it's not just about having a phone and access to internet. It's about having access to great software-enabled programs that help you do your job much better than you could without them. I mean, let's take a look at a platform like Slack, for instance. Slack, enables you to have really transparent and easy conversations with your team members. How much better would government be if they had, access to Slack and it was integrated with FOIA compliant plugins that made it really easy for people. So it's not just about an internet access point and the phone. There are so many more things that go into it than just that.
So this is topical. Worst experience I ever had selling government software is in this city, actually. Amazingly. And people are always like, when they talk to our company, they're like, wow, like you work in, we serve like Houston and Chicago. And they're like, do you serve San Francisco? And I'm like, no. And we tried to. And when we were first starting out, we were working with Supervisor Katie Tang, who's the supervisor for the Sunset District. And we were like, hey, we want to build this product to like help you manage requests that are coming in for citizens. And if you just give us product feedback, you can just have it for free. Like, we don't care. There are tons of other people. And because we wanted to give it to them, we ended up getting into, I still have this email chain. It's 16 different people across 5 different departments in the city trying to get me and my lawyers and their lawyers and procurement and IT and the city council's clerk and the clerk's office and the city's council member that I was working with to all agree on a contract that would basically say that we would give it to them for free. And it just went into all this nonsense. And we were this tiny company. Like, we couldn't do this. We ended up spending $500-600 in legal fees before we just said no. Like, we can't do this. We're trying to do the right thing, and you're just getting in your own way. And now, like, that's somebody that has a need, and we built a product that solves their need, and we now help governments across the country, and we can't help them. And they call us every once in a while. They're like, hey, like, how's it going? And other offices in SF do too. And like, it's helping government just get out of their own way. Like, there are good reasons for RFP process. If you're gonna build a bridge, like, yeah, go crazy. If you're gonna buy software that's like free or like $20 a month, like, let's not pretend like the world is gonna fall down if it doesn't go perfectly.
Cool. So actually, on the context of the mission, And that's for you, Maria. Can we, Judy, can we put the mission, that slide that you have? So the mission for this program is to use technology to make government accountable, efficient, and responsive. And since you are the communications expert in this panel, how would you advise these startups to focus their communication in selling to help the government achieve those three things: responsive, accountable, and efficient?
Well, you're asking about how they, in the actual selling and pitching, because with communications, there's sort of two different threads. There's the how are you selling, how are you getting in front of someone and pitching, and then there's a how are you communicating about it to everybody else, the influencers, the media, the press, potential partners. So is this specific to sort of like a pitch question, or?
What's the approach to, cutting all this red tape and being successful at selling something to the city of San Francisco? In the context of they want to use technology for those three things.
I think that there are a lot of things in common with selling to the private sector, and then there's things that are like vastly different. The things that are in common are getting to a very simple, clear value proposition and narrative and story that's up front. It's having a pitch that really brings out exactly what you're trying to do in a crisp way up front. And it's about acknowledging what the other options are, maybe what some of the risks are and competitors are, and being straightforward with that. I would say that companies that are trying to sell in the private sector often go down the direction of we have this latest edgy technology, it's out there, sort of appealing to early adopter audiences and maybe elite users. You look at like the Apple Watch or Samsung Galaxy. Those messages, I would think, aren't going to resonate at all because the needs are different. You're looking at more things that are secure and efficient and effective and equalizing and democratic sort of in their nature and how they work. Those aren't necessarily the same qualities as when you are pitching your tech product to private sector and to individuals. So while the same approach in telling your story and getting across the essence and making sure that you have just a few very crisp messages and you've road tested them, all of those things apply. But the nature of the messages and what you're talking about have to be different in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Okay.
It's adapting your message so that all these issues that they talk about are the real problems that you're solving, in addition to what you're.
And I think at the basis of any really great communication is empathy, is going into an audience or a room full of people that you're pitching to and saying, here, or giving the example that shows you really understand the problem in a meaningful way, and that you know how to solve it, and that you are empathetic to the challenges there, the budget issues, the RFP processes, and that you know them. Because I would think that people in government being pitched are going to assume you really don't know that. Right? Most of the people who pitch them don't, and they have to re-explain and re-educate. So by going in and showing that you know these things up front and sort of laying them out and explaining and using some data, that you can get past that first pretty major hurdle and let them know you're on their side. It's really important that they buy in from the beginning and they understand who they're talking to.
So is talking then to the government in this context like peeling an onion, meaning the core. Slack solves a core problem, which is the same for everybody, right? Making communications within a company frictionless, or whatever they're solving. If you're selling to the government, is it like, your onion has a bit more skin, so that the first approach is helping your client in the government cut the red tape so that they can get to the core benefit?
Right. What problem are you solving? How is it going to make life better? And how is it going to be more efficient and affordable? And then you have to get to some of the additional concerns. I think it's also true for private sector or government sector. You need to say, well, Slack is going to be a lot better in all these ways, but you're still going to have to check. The way you had to check email, you still have to check Slack. You know, it's not a panacea, not everything goes away, so that you are straightforward about what the challenges are going to be, because nobody wants to be sold a bill of goods, and we know that with any technology, there's going to be challenges. There are going to be resource issues and adaptation issues, and so being able to point those out up front and say, here's how you deal with them, or here's why they're better than what the option is, really important to be upfront and honest. I think in the sales process, most companies, large and small, whether it's an entrepreneur or a Fortune 500 tech company, like to focus on the positive, and I think particularly in the government sector, you have to be straightforward.
I think the one thing for like those extra layers of the onion you were talking about is, and this is really hard for startup founders to get into their heads, that A, you will build a better product than anything else on the market, and that doesn't matter. Like, that is not why you will win. And that's really hard if that's why you got into it. If you're like, hey, there's all this crappy government software and I can build something better, that's maybe 50% of the battle if we're generous. The other piece is that, like, the reason that you got into it is not necessarily the reason that it resonates with them, right? Like, solving their core problems for them is infinitely more important. So like, if you had some idea that you were like, I bet if we did this, if we built some product that, you know, maybe like people could tweet at government faster, like that's something that you're interested in. That may not be what government's priorities are, and that's totally okay. I think the end goal has to be, how do you help your users as much as possible? And part of that is just saying, like, whatever reasons I got into government or why I want to do it don't ultimately matter. Like, building a better product doesn't matter if nobody can use it. And that's what's really hard about government in that, like, with startups, you sell something to startups and someone wants to play around with it and use it. Like, I started using Slack before our company adopted it in my last company because I could, and I had no restrictions, and I even like paid for it, and that was fine. But for government, that's often not the case. And so I see a lot of people getting really frustrated that they're like, well, but our product is so much better. But like, that's not the problem that needs to be solved in government.
Let's break it down to brass tacks. The issue that you have to deal with as a startup selling into government is that you have to help them not be in the newspaper for buying and spending public funds on crappy software that doesn't work.
From an untrusted startup.
Right, from an untrusted source. You're not Google, you're not, you're not IBM, you're not Cisco. So how do you stop them, make sure that they do not get in trouble and that they are not in the newspaper and are not embarrassed as a government for trusting you and for trusting your software? That's it.
Isn't failing, buying half-baked products that fail is kind of the new thing, right? Like Slack and all that. You're willing to give them Slack because you're helping them kind of create the product. Is that not built into these new ways that the government wants to work? Meaning, if the product fails, you just unplugged it. That's it.
Right, but you could also still be, held publicly accountable for purchasing something that failed. There's a saying, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. And that, unfortunately, still prevails, even though I see governments wanting to be more innovative, wanting to use really great software that solves their problems in an elegant way. They still have to deal with the outside forces, and that's the press, and that's, public perception, that's the next electoral candidate, that's the next election, who might say, you paid for something that did not work and you used public funds to do so. So how do you eliminate that? Once you figure that out, I feel like you've got a very clear path to getting a government contract.
So you guys are all untrusted startups trying to sell to the government, right? Do you want to pitch in some questions? Specifically to what they have addressed, or shall we continue talking here? I'm opening for 2 minutes, and go ahead, yeah.
Well, what are ways that you've seen people successfully navigate that, given that we are a smaller company? Like, what are questions or answers to their questions about that can reassure them that they won't get in trouble and that we are trustworthy?
So
Can you
Yes. So the question was, what are some of the things that we've seen that have worked to address those fears and to kind of sell into government? So the way that we did it was we just said, here are all the bad things we don't like about government, and we are just not going to participate. And we're philosophers, so we're like very hard-headed about this. So like RFPs, we don't do RFPs. Contracts, we do not sign contracts. We refuse to submit bids. We will not talk to IT departments, which is like, people are like, whoa. And then for a while, like sometimes people were like very unfamiliar with this idea, but we had to structure our business in a way that we could get around all those bad parts, right? So departments, contrary to popular belief, can purchase things by themselves. They can be single decision makers if you're under a discretionary threshold. So we do monthly pricing because since we're not tying them into a very long-term contract, the purchase price is really just what they're buying that month because they can leave whenever they want. So now we get under discretionary budgets. That also helps because they can start, we built the product in such a way that one user can use it and have it be very useful. So we build like a CRM system and we allow them to collaborate with other people, even if those other people aren't on Romulus. So by minimizing, now the amount of risk they have to take isn't our whole city's getting on board or our whole department. It's really just like one person. Like if you can get like one person, it's gonna be $60 for a month. And that's now at the level where you're never going to get written up in the press for like let's say it's a disaster and they like wasted $60. That's okay. But a lot of the traditional like purchasing processes are you have companies coming in, they're like, okay, we'll build you a CRM system. It'll be $200,000 for the first year and then $100,000 a year in support contracts after that. Like, yeah, somebody's ass is on the line, right, if that goes wrong. So I think structuring it and realizing that they have all this political risk. So as low as you can lower that so that just one person can get on board and you can solve a problem for them and you don't don't tie them into any big contracts because that's immediately going to trigger purchasing. Lawyers are going to get involved because an individual doesn't know if your contract is reasonable or whatever. And then the other part was just having like data privacy policies that are extraordinarily friendly. And this is something where you can't do what the private sector does, where like they will claim ownership. Like Facebook owns all of the data that you give. Anything that you post, you don't own, and people get mad because they're like, this is my data, but it's not. Like you can read the terms, you don't own it. But that doesn't fly in government, obviously, and nor should it. So I think being very upfront about those and being like, here are the things that you probably have questions about. You probably wonder, what happens if we go out of business? That's a very reasonable question. We are contractually obligated, like legally based on our privacy policy, to export all of our information and give it to you in a machine-readable format. And just like going through all of those things and answering those questions and, as she was saying, like being very upfront and saying there are some new things about government that they have to deal with that I didn't have to deal with when I tried out Slack, because like if Slack lost all my messages, who cares? And just being very upfront and being like, yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and we do everything possible so that you build that trust.
Any of you want to add?
I think that one of the best things you could do is be in the STIR program, because having a case study and having a reference goes so far. When you can point to, we've done this, and here's how it went, and you can let them talk to people in a particular city. There's no better predictor of future performance than past performance, right? So I think having a strong case study, even if you need to go build that over time and do some free implementations, it goes a long way in terms of believability.
Does that answer?
Yeah? Anybody else has a question at this point that they want any of these three panelists to address?
I'm sorry, I came in a little bit late. Can you please reintroduce yourselves? Just a 1 minute spiel.
Sure, actually, you guys never introduced yourselves, so go ahead.
Okay, I'm Chris Maddox. I'm the CEO of Seneca Systems. We build software to help government departments manage the services that they provide to citizens. I was a philosophy major. My spirit animal is the octopus. And yeah, they're really brilliant creatures. Their minds are distributed throughout their bodies, so like their arms will actually have different personalities. Some are more like cautious and trying new things. That's about all I got.
I'm Monique Woodard. I'm a venture partner at 500 Startups, and I invest in companies. I also run a micro fund within 500 Startups dedicated to investing in markets that are seeing high growth with Black and Latino consumers on one side and Black and Latino founders on the other side. I was also a innovation fellow at the at MOCI, Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation, and I'm the executive director and co-founder at Black Founders. And I don't know what my spirit animal is. I'm so sorry. I don't know. It's probably something horrible.
Something horrible.
I'm Maria Amundsen. I am a entrepreneur myself and tech communications person. I started a little PR firm for tech companies many years ago, and built and sold that over time to Edelman, which is the largest communications company, and stayed with Edelman running their Silicon Valley office, and then most recently being their global tech sector head, and have just left, actually, taking 6 months off, and then I started a fellowship at Stanford in January. So I come at this from a communications point of view, having worked with a lot of startups and a lot of big companies as well, and helping them tell their stories.
So, Monique, since you see a lot of startups every day, do you see any trends? So, for example, this approach that San Francisco has, and the fact that you finally broke through and were able to sell to this city, are there any trends in governments that are more friendly now than 10 years ago to startups, and how can they best take advantage of these trends? Because these guys are still learning, right? How to deal with unproven companies that can.
So I see as a trend that governments across the world are really interested in startups and are really interested in innovation. And that's a great thing for you all, because that means that they're more willing to work with and to listen to and hopefully purchase from a startup. However, that doesn't mean that the barriers to making that actually happen have gotten that much lower in actual practice. So I think from a startup perspective, there are certainly startups who see government as their primary customer or as their beachhead customer. And then there are other startups where government could be interesting, but there are other beachhead customers that are much easier to target. So when you think about startups that could potentially sell to government, they generally fall into those two buckets. And for startups where government is your primary customer or your beachhead customer, I think the trend that makes it a little bit easier to sell into government is kind of the rise of the innovation office, where people are slightly more willing to be experimental. And so that's really your pathway in, I think. That's like your back door. So programs like STIR and just innovation offices in general, like MOCI and the Boston Innovation Office, like being able to have really good connections and entrees into those people are often how you're able to get in front of a decision maker and someone who can actually, purchase something from you.
So, Maria, you mentioned empathy. And now I want to shift to the individual in the government that these guys are selling to. And I have a question. I don't know if you have experience with that, but is this person being looked as, I'm the one who brings innovation to the government and my peers are going to see me as, I'm breaking these walls. We're in a walled city hall, right? And the red tape doesn't let us touch anything, but yet I am the one who brought Slack to the government, and I'm the one who brought Twitter to the government. Are these people needing to look like these are the innovators within the government?
I think that does drive a lot of them. They have this inner sense of being a champion and a little bit of a renegade, but not so much that they're not accepted or welcome in their own government, but this sense that they are the innovators and they're the doorway to that. So they want to look like they've got the best technology, the most efficient, and to Marine's point, they don't want to be embarrassed by this. They need to come through. But I actually have a question for you, maybe just a show of hands. How many of you either are selling now or have sold to government? I'm just curious, they're in the process of doing that. And I guess just a few examples. What would you say are your biggest challenges in doing that? What are you running into right now that that is causing you a challenge?
Past performance.
Like you have
Explain a little.
Typically, when you go through the RFP process or you're bidding on things, there's a 2-year, 3-year, 5-year minimum of
Right.
being in business. you know, so many prime contracts, so on and so forth, so past performance, prior performance.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So he said past performance, and that a lot of these RFPs will have requirements where you need to have been doing this for like 2 or 3 times, or 2 or 3 years, or 5 years, or you need to have like reference customers or whatever. We ran into this in San Jose. We ended up triggering an RFP for the whole city to do a CRM. We were like, oh, this is awesome. And then we were like, wait, we will literally never win this because we're a small company, even though, and this was one of those times where we were like, we are the best product, and it's impossible. It's literally impossible for us to win. And that's the other thing about the like RFP system is that like it's not designed. It's actually designed so that you can't even compete, because, and you think about it like reasonably. I think empathy is important because if you think about it from their perspective, that's actually really reasonable. Like if you're a government and you're providing services to citizens, it's actually pretty reasonable that if the city comes together or like the community comes together, is like what like bare minimum should we have for people who are going to work with the government? Maybe doing it for like 2 years, which really isn't that long of a time, is like kind of reasonable, right? And that's why I think that like traditional avenue of like trying to win a contract or trying to win this big thing is like you're trying to go from like 0 to 60, and you gotta walk before you run. And so just like getting champions, I think the individual, as you were mentioning, the individual, that's where you're gonna win. Winning one champion and having them advocate on your behalf is infinitely more important than selling like an entire city and barely getting it and like doing okay, right? Because they're gonna trust each other. Like we trust each other. I trust other startup CEOs when I talk to them, when I need advice about how to lead a company more than anybody, because they also go through this problem. And I think that's the key is, even if you get far fewer users, getting ones, this is how Gmail started, is they just had like 100 users that were so rabid about it, and then they put up a landing page and like pretended, they didn't actually have the capacity to handle all the people that signed up, because it was this kind of weird like skunkworks, like almost not okay project that this guy was doing. But anyway, they started with these users who just adored the product, and that's far more valuable to you than having 10,000 users that are just whatever, because they don't help you in those future processes.
Yes.
Hey, this is a question for Chris. So, what you mentioned is going under discretionary budgets. How do you find out that information? I guess it's a two-part question. The first one is, what's the process of finding that out? Like, what's the cap and per agency? The second question to that is, if it's on a per user basis, and at one point sort of getting adoption with a limited number of users, if you want to get to a point where like the aggregate amount on an annual basis or whatever is over that limit, then like, do you trigger an RFP? Do you go through that process? What's sort of the step once you scale per agency?
Yeah, good question. So for an individual agency, we've never come even close. I mean, I've seen like school boards that can make purchases up to $10,000 on their own accord, and at $60 a month, like you're gonna have to, if in like single purchases, or sometimes annually. Sometimes for like in San Jose, for the city council, they can't make any purchase that will accumulate to more than $3,000 in a year. So those can get pretty low for politicians in particular. That's another reason why I think we couldn't give away our software for free to a politician, which at the time, I guess now saying that is really obvious. But so I think for agencies, they actually have a much higher cap. I remember talking to the purchasing department in San Francisco about this, just seeing if we would trigger an RFP, and he was like, okay, so like how many hundreds of thousands of dollars a year will it be? And I was like, it'll be like, I don't know, like $1,000 in a year. And he's like, I don't care. And I was like, okay, because it's like not that much money, right? Every year, local governments alone spend $1.1 trillion providing services to constituents. So if you're like, hey, this is gonna be $100 for the first month, you're never gonna run into problems. In terms of the cap and like how far high up you go, really dependent on the department, and that's where being strategic about who's on board and whose problems you're solving really matter. So if you're solving a problem that matters a lot to the day-to-day workers, that's great, but when it comes time to escalate that and like scale up that business, you might have problems. If you're doing something that's a really big deal to the mayor or to the city manager, it's gonna be much, much easier for them to find funds if they wanna get it done, because they feel the pain and they're the ones that have the power to do so. That's how Salesforce grew, right? Talk to a salesperson about Salesforce, they hate it. But it doesn't matter, because Salesforce has the best analytic capabilities, which is what the CEOs and the sales managers care about, and they're the ones with the purchasing decision. So it's got to be this balance between like getting something that the users really love, but then being prepared to answer a very different buyer. And that's one of the challenges in government is maybe your first users are not the ultimate buyers for who's going to roll it out to the department, and what they care about is very different than what the mayor cares about, is very different than what the like city council cares about. So nailing down those stories and how you progress, the system can work fine for everybody if you know what people care about. They'll find a way to make it happen. And I think oftentimes what happens is they don't feel like you really understand where they're coming from, and so they're not willing to like figure out a way to make it work.
So, Ben, sorry, just one follow-up question to that. What's still a question in my head is how do you, it seems like critical information to know that what this agency's discretionary budget is, and is there a way to figure out that before you go in? Because you could end up building a lot of relationships and networking, like, we can only spend like $1,000 a year, right?
Is that publicly available?
Yeah, is there a public way to get access to that?
We've just asked people. He's asking how you figure out what the discretionary budgets are. Just call them and ask them. I mean, these are people like their job is to respond to citizens, and that's one of the great advantages. When we started, we just wandered. I wandered into City Hall and would just walk into people's offices. It was weird, but you could do it because like that's kind of like it was city council members. Like, what are you gonna do? Like turn away the citizen? Like no. So you can actually just call them and ask them, and that's a great thing. And one of the, I think you were talking earlier about the misconceptions that we have about government, that they're like really closed off or they're lazy or incompetent or whatever. Like they're people like anybody else who they got into a place where you're not going to be famous, you're not going to make a lot of money, right? Why are they there? They're there because they want to serve their communities, and if you can help them do that, yeah, they would love to answer your questions.
Back to empathy.
What about back to challenges? Any other challenges that you've run into in the sales process?
I just wanted to offer that Code for America does have a map of the discretionary thresholds for at least some jurisdictions.
Audience member informed us that Code for America has a map of discretionary budgets. I got you.
Yes.
Hi, this is great. It's just jam-packed information. I have a meeting next week where I'll be pitching, and just at the concept stage, and it's exciting that I can do this with the California Public Utilities Commission and the Strategic Growth Council about greenhouse gas emissions reductions, crowdfunded, peer-to-peer. And so again, just concept, and I'm going to be, I don't mock up, I'm just going to pull things together, show this is it in 15 seconds, explain the technology. Now, I know there's some risks, obviously, with that when you just are at the concept stage, and I wonder if this is a relevant question for the rest of the audience as well. And so that's pretty much it. Like, what do I need to, I have pretty much like 5 minutes prepared, but what else do I need to be thinking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so the question was, you have a pitch in a few days with the CPUC, and how you only have a concept, you are pre-product. So what are you thinking about as you're going into this pitch? I think that the thing that you need to be prepared for is that they're going to ask you how you get from here to there. So how do you get from concept and idea to being able to execute? And what are your needs? What is the timeline? And when can I have it? The when can I have it is your best case scenario, right? Because that means that you have a potential customer. But being able to really be prepared and think through what that actually looks like for you to go from, pitching a concept to having a fully baked product or platform is what you really need to be able to answer.
I agree completely with Monique, and would add that you want to be really upfront that you are in concept, but also that you're taking input. I had a company many years ago, probably you guys weren't even born, but there was the Palm Pilot was being introduced, and we went to Walt Mossberg, who was in at the Wall Street Journal and was their top tech reviewer, and we said, this thing isn't ready. We showed him a chunk of balsa wood that the chief engineer was carrying around, and said, well, here's what the Palm Pilot said. It was a personal organizer that would track your data. And let him give input. Oh, you really should make sure you have, the speed around this kind of input, and let's talk about graffiti, which was this way of input. And they actually did take some of his advice in. And so when they launched that thing 7 months later, they got the most glowing review from Walt Mossberg, because he felt like he got a chance to shape what was in that product. And there's nothing that's more, I think, exhilarating for someone than to think that they got a chance to, especially if someone's going to be buying the technology, to shape what it would be. So I think putting yourself in listening mode and asking a lot of questions about what it is that would be most useful to them, what their problems are, because you're still at a point where you could actually act on that, right? That's a huge advantage. So I would definitely build in that.
I would also say this is very similar to pitching to like VCs, right? Where you will come to them at a point where you may be too early, right? And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from the CEO of Twilio. And he said, when we started out, we didn't have, like, we were talking about this stuff where there were all these like, the process at that point, if you wanted to get your own phone number for your like call center or whatever, is you had to pay these cable companies to like come and hook them up. And they had this whole idea, and like nobody really understood what he was talking about. And he said, the strategy that I followed was I would talk to the VC and I would say, what do you want to see? And then I would go do it. And if you do that, if you come back doing what you have done, that's the biggest worry with you right now, right? Is that you have a concept and they're like, I don't know, like 100 people could come to me with the same concept. How do I know that this is the one that's going to execute on it? And if you, I would say, don't try to close it. Like, don't think that you're going to come out of there with a deal sign. But if you come out of there with a very specific list of features and you're like, hey, I'm going to build this stuff. I'll see you in 6 months. It's almost better if they think like, yeah, that's crazy. You're not going to do that. Because when you do come back and you're like, you know, all those people who come up and ask you for advice or ask you questions or whatever, or say they're going to do all these things and then don't, well, look, you didn't pay me. I just went out and did it because that's what I do. I get stuff done. That is like the most compelling story, and that's the most important part in any of these relationships, is that human component and building that trust.
I have a question for whoever wants to answer this question. Can you use government size and transparency to your advantage? So, for example, if you're selling to a big corporation, they're not accountable to anybody. Their information is not public. There's a lot of egos. People want to get promoted. You know, in government, you know, as you were saying, people want to serve. People are here. Is there a way to use that to your advantage, to really make your sale much more efficient? Or is the government always an octopus to be, you know, every arm has a different personality?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, it depends how much you want to get into that. Like, if you really want to fight that like battle on the public stage, good luck. I don't. It's like a weird thing to do. There are like, one of the things you can do is like, you'll see a lot of bad practices in government, especially in relationships with vendors, and that's one of the reasons why, for the record, that they're very worried. So, for example, I was reading this article the other day where there's this guy who works at a company that sells to government. They're called Acela, and he works in sales in like business development, lives in the North Bay. They're currently working on a contract to sign a contract with the city of San Diego, which is 500 miles away, and he donated $1,000 to the mayor of San Diego's re-election campaign. You're like, what? Like, this goes on? And the only reason we know that was from a Freedom of Information request. And so there are a lot of these really bad things that go on in government that you can like talk about and say, hey, if we want to change this, like, one of the really tough parts is that you probably feel like you're up against like Oracle. And like, how the heck they know all these people, you know, they've been, the image is always that like people are playing golf somewhere and you're not invited or something, you know, something like that, right? You just like feel like the cards are all stacked in your favor. But there are people that are very interested in this. There are people both in the civic tech community, in the journalism community, who are thinking about these things and writing about these things. So I think as much as possible, yeah, take advantage of that transparency. Also realize that a lot of these people, the risks for them is that they get called out in public, but also a lot of the reward can be like, hey, we're a very innovative city. Like, we want to be seen as pushing things forward. And so part of it is pitching not only how it improves their day-to-day, but what is the story that your product helps tell about their city? What is it that, hey, you guys adopted this new 911 system, that says that you really care about emergency preparedness, about getting services to your citizens as quickly as possible, so helping them, you may think that they'll just like naturally see your app and be like, oh, there are like all of these stories I can tell, but like you have to help them, guide them through this process, because a lot of the technology is very, very new, and what may be natural to you and what may be natural, like the story you say in your head, is not always very natural to them.
So it's about storytelling and communication.
Storytelling, communication, and values. I think getting back to, if you're selling it to government, transparency and collaboration and public communication and better efficiencies, like all of these basic values, that's what you can use to your side, because corporations will give some lip service to those things, but in the end, they're just trying to make money, right? However they're going to make money, if it's a for-profit, that really drives a lot of decision-making inside of corporates, no matter what they say. We know that because they're responsible to shareholders. But with government, they really do have to be true to those values. They are trying to be more transparent, desperately trying hard and working at it, and to be more efficient and to save time and to improve communications with their citizens. Those things are very real problems in the media every day. So to the extent that you are selling into that and that's behind your message, I think that you use the government to your advantage. And that is a little bit of empathy, because that's saying, like, what matters to you, that's what matters to us, and that's where we can help.
Just a quick one. The last thing is that they almost never get positive stories in the press. Like, you never see, like, San Francisco Chronicle, like, the city's doing a great job. Like, thanks, public servants, for, like, working your ass off for your citizens. Like, that story has never been told. So, like, anything that you can do, like, and that's part of empathy, is understanding that, like, these people get beat down. And so if you can help just, like, build them up, like, help make little things easier, like, help tell a good story about them, that goes a really long way.
We have about 5 more minutes for questions for the panelists, and then we wanted to invite some of our startups who are here in the room to give us their pitch and some of our feedback. So, looks like there's a few questions here.
Yeah, I was wondering, does it make a big difference if the startup is a B Corp or not? I just wanted to know if that makes a difference or not.
Does it matter if it's a B Corp or not? Matter in what way?
When they're trying to work on social impact challenges for the city, like you're trying to address some service, but like sometimes they think, are you a B Corp or not?
Oh, I don't. Do you know?
No, from a city perspective, I don't know. From a investor perspective, it matters.
How?
So I want companies to be a Delaware C Corp, but maybe if you're only going after impact investors, they probably, think differently about that. I'm kind of okay with B Corps, maybe. I'd prefer not be a B Corp, but yeah.
I think it doesn't matter in terms of your impact. You can do good things and be a B Corp or not. Like, we're not a B Corp only because going through that documentation is not going to make us do good things or not. Like, we're not going to adhere to our values or not because we're a B Corp. It could be a good signaling function. So if you say, hey, one of the things, you guys are always very worried about working with strictly for-profit companies. Hey, we're like halfway between public service and like private industry. So that could be helpful. I don't know that there are any like regulations or anything around it, but yeah. And the other thing for like venture is like, they care until you're making a lot of money, and then they don't care. Like, Pinterest is a B Corp. They don't have any problems raising money, so like traction solves everything.
What's your advice about reaching out to new cities? So we're in touch with the County of San Francisco. They've introduced us to a few other counties, so that's nice. But how do we get in touch with counties that they don't know? And like, in terms of cold reach out, or do you make sure that you get a warm intro, or what have you seen as most effective?
So advice for expanding to other cities.
Okay, yeah, advice for expanding to other cities. Number one, there is a network called Emerging Local Government Leaders, ELGL. Google it, sign up. Individual membership is $20. It's about 1,500 people across the country, and these are all, they trend to younger, more innovative. Like, they just sponsored City Hall Selfie Day, was on August 15th. which sounds ridiculous until you see the number of people who took selfies in front of City Hall, like worldwide. It is absolutely insane. But those are the people who are generally younger. They're generally more tech savvy. They're just willing to experiment. Like I did a webinar for them on Slack, and like I don't even sell Slack, but like they were interested, and so we were like, yeah, cool. And that's another place where you have a lot of expertise that can be valuable to them. So just reaching out and just saying, hey, like I want to be involved in this. This is kind of what we do. Could you like write something about us to your members or something like that is like a very good start. They also know all of the people who have specific problems. Cold reach out can work. Warm intros are always better. But if you're gonna do cold calls, just like, I guess the thing is just like be okay with that and like know that the hit rate is like 1 in 100. So like you're gonna have sad times. It's gonna be a lonely road, but it can be worth it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. I'll look up the.
There's no silver bullet is the problem, right? But there's an ELGO pop-up conference in San Francisco in October that you should definitely go to.
Are you?
Form of warm, I would say. I would just add that any form of warm is better than cold. I mean, sometimes you just have to cold call, but any connection, even in a separate department, or is going to give you a human element.
You have a case study already? A success story in one city so that you can sell it to others?
Yeah, we will soon.
Otherwise, you would overreach too fast, right? You had a question.
Oh, I was just wondering if kind of independent of the discretionary budget threshold thing, if there were any trends in the kinds of software or solutions that governments are willing to take a chance on?
So trends in the kind of software or solutions that governments are willing to buy right now. Do you guys see any trends?
Not any that
Do they usually follow industry? Meaning, oh, Slack, everybody's talking about Slack, using Slack, we should look into it. Is that the way it works?
They follow industry. Salesforce was released in 1999, and we are selling a CRM to government in 2016, where most people are using Excel and Outlook. So they're following the trend, but it's trailing. I don't think, no, they're not going to follow, like, they'll understand that Slack is like hot or whatever, like some people have like played around with Snapchat, but like at the end of the day, it doesn't help them get stuff done. A lot of the things that are very easy to adopt, like, well, Slack could be more useful, but things like Snapchat is like, it doesn't solve core problems for them. And that's one of the big problems is that a lot of these, if you see a trend, there will be all these startups that are, or like companies that are building products for private companies, which is sometimes a related problem, but not exactly the same. And so them following the trends, like they don't keep, like none of them will read TechCrunch. So if your like big PR strategy is like going after TechCrunch, like they don't know what that is, nor should they, because most of that stuff does not apply. So I think they have kind of their own trends that they talk about, and that just takes embedding yourself in their world.